Hey, welcome to PTSD 911 Presents. My name is Conrad Weaver, and I'm your host for the program. And for some reason, my camera is not focusing. That's weird. Sorry about that. Happy New Year to everybody. Glad you are able to join us. And if you are watching us, please let us know where you're from. I'd love to see that in the chat. And also let us know what kind of agency you're a part of if you're a first responder. And if you're not a first responder, let us know uh, what brought you to the program tonight and what interested you in this program. And we're going to introduce our guest in just a minute. But first, I just want to kind of give you a little bit of a background as to what this program is all about. So I'm a film producer and director of the PTSD 911 documentary that's in production right now. We are still in production. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in just a second. But that this program tonight is sponsored by the film. It's a program that we decided to start and to bring the community together as a resource for first responders and those who support first responders. I am not a first responder myself, so full disclosure, I'm a filmmaker, but I have many friends all across the country and even now around the world who are first responders, and I'm a huge advocate for those who take care of our communities. I think that we should do everything in our power possible to take care of our first responders who take care of us. And so it is my goal to produce a film that tells that story. And for this program tonight, it's my goal to bring resources, to bring people who have experienced many things that we're going to talk about, trauma and PTSD and all those things, but also who are experts at helping others to work through those traumas. I encourage you, if you have not checked out our website, I encourage you to go over to PTSD911movie.com sometime when you get a moment, and you can check out our trailer for the film, which is right here. There's other resources there. You can actually make a donation, which we'd love to have more your support. And there's also some other resources there on our website where check it out, PTSD911movie.com, and check out all the resources there. We also have, we're on all the social sites. If you are on social media, you can find us at PTSD911 movie. And we're now also on TikTok. Yes, I posted my first TikTok video yesterday. So if you are on TikTok, join me there. I'd love to see you and like it and share it and all that fun stuff. So my son convinced me to jump on the TikTok. So we'll see how that goes. But I want to talk a little bit about the film, and I decided that we have three goals for the film. Three things we want to accomplish with this movie. The first is to raise awareness. We know that the general public doesn't really understand what first responders do and the traumas that they carry. And through this film, we want to be able to raise that awareness. The second thing we want to do, and I think is really important, to smash the stigma of asking for help. That make it okay to not be okay and to raise your hand and say, hey, I need help. I need someone to talk to about the stuff I'm dealing with. And the third thing we want to do, and probably the hardest thing, is to inspire change in agencies. And, big ships take a long time to turn, but we want to inspire change. We want to highlight those agencies that are doing things well. They're not perfect. No one's perfect, but they're doing things well, better than most. And we're going to highlight those agencies and bring them to this film. And hopefully some chief someplace will see this film and say, you know what, we need to implement those things into our agency to begin making a difference in our first responder communities. And so PTSD911movie.com is the website. And tonight we are here with PTSD 911 Presents. And so I'm so happy that you are here. And I'm also very happy that we have a very special guest who has joined us tonight all the way from Florida, sunny Florida. We have Dan Jarvis, who is the president and founder of 220. Dan is a U.S. Army Sergeant First Class, retired. He's a deputy sheriff, retired from that. And he's a former U.S. Army drill sergeant. I hope he doesn't do some shouting tonight. He's also the developer of the 220 Resiliency Coaching Program, the co-developer of the Trauma Resiliency Protocol, and the developer of the Emotions Management Process. And he has a master's of public administration from Central Michigan University. Dan Jarvis, welcome to PTSD 911 Presents.
Mr. Weaver, appreciate the invitation to speak to your audience.
Well, it's so good to have you here. For as we talked a little bit before the show started, there's a lot of things going on in the world. And just today I read that we've already had 4 law enforcement suicides this year already. It's only the 5th of January. And we've already had 4 registered that we know of law enforcement suicides. What's going on in our community, that in our law enforcement, in our first responders, that's causing that kind of um, reaction from folks?
I think one of the biggest thing is there is a stigma attached to asking for help, and crushing the stigma is so necessary. What we're expecting the men and women who put that uniform on to do is beyond the pale when it comes to your average person couldn't comprehend. Yeah, I was a deputy sheriff here in Florida for right around 7 years, and you see stuff day in and day out, day in and day out. You might go a whole week without anything significant happening, and then all of a sudden you might have a triple homicide, and or you might have to do CPR on a 2-year-old child, and you're helpless to do anything to help that individual, or you're getting shot at, or people are being ambushed, pretty regularly. Two
Yeah,
of
I've
those,
seen that this past year. That was a huge thing. People just, in fact, I saw one recently where a law enforcement officer was sleeping off duty in their car, and somebody came up and just shot him in the head.
yeah,
It's horrible.
that's a horrendous thing. It's also a big safety factor for the officer to do anything like that. But when you work the hours that these folks work, the job is extremely taxing and fatiguing.
Hmm.
But the biggest thing is the stigma that's attached to asking for help, because what ends up happening is if the deputy or the police officer asks for help, the belief is they're going to get taken off the road.
Hmm.
They might get sidelined. I worked with a deputy sheriff here in Central Florida, and he was scared to death that he wasn't going to be able to get back in uniform.
Hmm.
And he's on light duty, and he's fine now, but that's a reality. So many of them won't even ask for help.
Hmm.
It's culture. It's cop culture. It's the same thing in the military. Suck it up,
Hmm.
rub some dirt on it.
Hmm.
You're going to be fine. Just get past it. But the reality is, it's the biggest misunderstanding of what trauma actually is. If you're looking at a lot of the new research, post-traumatic stress is not a psychological disorder. It's a neurological disorder. It's where the limbic system in the brain literally hijacks the process. So in other words, I'll use a car metaphor. You're idling at 1,000 RPMs. That's normal brain function. All of a sudden, a traumatic event occurs, and you slam on the accelerator, and it go up to 7,500 RPMs, and then you never come off the gas pedal. That's all PTS is that part of the brain where the amygdala is just firing. It's firing 24/7. So those emotions are continually connected to that amygdala, which is why you have those flashbacks, the intrusive thoughts. It's just easy, quick access. It's kind of like what I also call it the thumb drive.
Hmm.
And if you don't process the emotions appropriately, i.e., sleeping, proper sleep hygiene, or not self-medicating, because I knew a lot of law enforcement officers. They get off work and they'd open up the bottle just to sleep, and those are doing things that are preventing the REM sleep. And then you get some that are prescribed medications, and many of the medications are REM sleep blockers.
Yeah.
I hate to tell you, but you got to hit REM sleep to process those emotions.
Right.
And then the culture at the top. Some agencies, I've like in Florida, we're lucky. You have to change the culture at the top of the organization. In other words, you got to be understanding that, the term you use when you outsource trauma, you got to be able to let these girls decompress. But if they're bottling it up and not wanting to talk about it, they might be dealing with it for a decade or longer. So the emotional temperature of the country is causing people to take actions against law enforcement, and that's got to change.
Right.
And that comes from the straight to the top of our leadership in politics. Doesn't matter which political party you're in. If you're going to foment a movement that goes against law enforcement, it's going to have an effect on the local communities. And people will start chasing those emotions, and and ends up very poorly.
Yeah. I want to get into in a little bit into some of the solutions that you've come up with to help with these, kind of mitigate some of these issues. But I want to first, for our audience, kind of give us a snapshot of who you are and your experience. I know you started in the Army and you had law enforcement experience. So kind of give us that kind of the cliff notes of your story.
So I actually started in the Army when I was 17, right out of high school. I got out of the Army just before Saddam had invaded Kuwait, and then I got recalled to active duty, but it was very short-lived because that operation was over pretty quickly. And then I got out again, went into law enforcement after finishing college. 9/11 happens, and then I'm right back in. I decided I wanted to, go take the fight to the enemy, and get some payback for what happened to us on 9/11. So I'm literally having to go back through basic training all over again in my mid-30s, and I get assigned to Hawaii, where I quickly was deployed to Iraq. So I had the 15-month deployment. So it was a pretty lengthy deployment. We lost 18 Americans on that deployment. I was combat infantryman. We lost 17 Americans, 1 interpreter is what it was, 18 out of the unit. Came back after that deployment and went right into drill sergeant duty. And then immediately from drill sergeant duty, I went right to a deploying unit. So in April of 2011, as an infantryman, I deployed to Afghanistan with 124 Infantry Battalion. It was a Stryker brigade up in Fort Wainwright, Alaska. Got to Afghanistan. We were at about 7,500 feet elevation. And during that deployment, half my squad was medevaced out of country, mostly due to IEDs or indirect fire. And one of my kids was killed in the deployment, and felt extremely responsible for Doug's death. He was one of the gun crews that was assigned to my squad. And as we're getting ready to come to the end of the deployment, I had received a Red Cross notification where my mom had passed away. So I had I was managing fairly well all the way up until it became personal with my home life. So with 3 weeks left in the deployment, I'm back in Florida attending my mom's funeral services. And then I go right back to Alaska. And the first thing I did was I started self-medicating with alcohol. Now I had alcohol accessible and available. And that's how I actually learned how to sleep again, because I myself stepped on a pressure plate, detonated an IED about 5-10 feet away from me. So I had a brain injury and just sleep deprived. And so alcohol became my go-to. I kind of sucked it up, and when I got taken off of the line unit and put up into the operations, and I kind of got slowed down when it came to the operations tempo of the unit, it became more of a paperwork, admin kind of a position, man, that's when everything just kind of came full circle. About 11 and a half months after getting back from Afghanistan, I got to a point where I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And as a staff sergeant, where do you go for help? That stigma that we put on mental health, I was like, man, I know I'm tougher than this. I mean, I did drill sergeant duty. I did a 15-month deployment to Iraq. I've seen combat. I fought, I've been injured. And now all of a sudden I'm having these nightmares and these, intrusive thoughts and the emotions going crazy. That was the biggest thing, was the number of different emotions that you experienced in that trauma response. And the next thing you know, I'm sitting there looking at a rifle in a corner of my room in a basement apartment outside the back gate of Fort Wainwright. That, to me, suicide became a better option than asking for help. Whether anything would have happened or not is irrelevant, but in my mind at the time, that's kind of where I was. And there was some kids that lived in the apartment above me, and I heard them running across my ceiling as I'm sitting there looking at this rifle. And I'm like, whoa, that's a really bad idea. Yeah, I didn't want to hurt a kid. I didn't want to hurt one of their family members, because high power rifle is going to go right through the ceiling. And so I passed out that night like every other night, and I woke up the next morning to a phone call from Ryan, who was one of my soldiers, and he was like, "Hey, Sergeant Jarvis, did you hear about Corey?" Now that's always a bad question for anybody in the military, because either one, they're in jail, or two, they're dead. And I'm like, nobody would happen. So Corey shot and killed himself last night. So that was like very impactful, because I remember looking at that rifle and I just kind of buried my head in my hands. I'm like, nobody had a clue that he was struggling, and then I realized nobody had a clue that I was struggling. So I kind of...
Isn't that often a thing where, whether you're a first responder or you're in the military and you're struggling, it's a silent struggle, right?
You feel absolutely alone. There's a gentleman I worked with who was a former infantry officer, and he said something profound. He was like, I can be in the middle of Walmart packed and still feel like I'm alone. That's the fight or flight part of post-traumatic stress. You're just isolated from the world and you're alone. So I always say that Corey saved my life. Unfortunately, it's when he took his own. That to me, I couldn't give permission to my guys to do that. So I continued to fight and push through it. I still self-medicate with alcohol. And I had a couple surgeries after returning, and I got caught up in the 2014 drawdown. And that's when the Army said, hey, we need your position. It's time for you to retire. We need it for somebody healthy. And I get that. I mean, I do understand that because I was not an effective infantryman after both shoulders and my left knee. So, took that uniform off and I transitioned out, which had its own set of unique challenges. But then I just traded one uniform for another and I went right back into law enforcement. I was very, one of my wounded warriors, his dad was the elected sheriff of Seminole County, Florida. And when all the wounded warriors came back after our deployment, I was his chaperone. So we built a friendship and a relationship. And he says, hey, Danny, why don't you come back into law enforcement? And I hadn't even thought about that at the time. I was getting, well, now what? So then I actually did. I said, all right, let's do this. And I got back into a law enforcement agency in Central Florida. And when I put that uniform back on and I'm actually on the road, something weird happened. I felt normal again.
Wow.
Because now I was no longer a fish out of water. My brain was operating fight or flight. I mean, it's the nature of the profession of that job. You're fight or flight, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I felt normal for a while. Answering calls, getting into foot pursuits, motor vehicle pursuits, you name it. We were doing it. Drug cases, all kinds of stuff. I worked a crime suppression team. So I worked the street crime. So for a good year, a little over a year and a half, I'm just basically doing proactive policing. And I was really thriving at that. And then, I had, due to some of the complications of, back injuries from deployments, I had something called spinal stenosis, and that's where the bundle of nerves at the base of the spine get compressed, and the duty belt was literally just causing significant pain, and I didn't want to put anybody else at risk. And then my ex-wife and I, we discussed it, and I said, well, maybe it's time to, I got vested in the Florida retirement system. Let me hang up the uniform, and woo, man, that's when everything just went sideways all over again. Because once that honey-do list got completed, the idle mind truly is the devil's playground. That's why we don't even track veteran first responders, first responders that retire or leave the profession. I would put money on it that the suicide rates there is significant. In the Army or military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, it's veterans, it's on average 22 a day. I would imagine it's probably the same, if not more, because there's more law enforcement and firefighters.
Right. So at what point did you decide to get help for yourself, and how did that look?
Well, to be honest, it wasn't because of me. It was because of my ex-wife. And we weren't married while I was in the military. We got married after military, and she never experienced that part of me. So she didn't even know about what I did or saw in deployments. And she was like, you're having nightmares. You're soaking the sheets every night. You're sweating. It really kind of freaked her out, and she didn't know how to handle it. So she asked me to go get help. And I was like, you know what? I'm not a cop anymore. I don't have a security clearance to worry about on active duty. I'll just go to the VA. And I did. I went to the VA, and, there was, hey, take some pills. That's your first step. Then it was talk.
Is that always like the first response from
if you show any symptoms of depression, which PTS normally accompanies, because you're not sleeping and you're drained and your body is just worn down. So that's pretty much the first protocol, is take some medication. And so I did. I started taking the medication, and then talk therapy was just, not for me. It was like literally, hey, talk about the event from point A to point B. Like for me, it was when we lost Doug. So I had to literally relive all of the details of that entire mission, from leaving the wire to pulling the striker, dragging it along the main route all the way back in, and the medevacs. And so you start feeling the physiology of all of those emotions start bombarding you. And my ex-wife was like, you're getting worse, and I'm like,
because you don't know what to do with those emotions, right?
I know, right? You're in there for an hour. You open that tourniquet up, and you those emotions that we do a really good job bottling up and boxing up and putting away is just exposed. And then they give you homework assignment. They call in vivo exposure. Like, well, sit in your office and listen to taps for an hour every day. You know, if you've been to a military memorial service in combat, you know, and you listen to taps, I mean, it is excruciatingly emotional. And so that was like what their expectations were. And
this was a VA counselor or
a VA psychologist. The therapy treatment was prolonged exposure. Right now, that's what the VA considers their best evidence-based treatment for PTSD. And all they're trying to do is get you numb to the events. So the third session, I get ready to go, and they called and they canceled an appointment. And I'm like, okay, well, when can I get back in? And said, well, the doctor doesn't have an availability for 4 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm like, 4 weeks? Oh,
wow.
Well, I 4 weeks come and go. You're left with everything exposed. And then I go to another appointment, and same thing. It's talk therapy. You're doing 12 weeks on the same traumatic incident.
Wow.
And you're literally exposing all those emotions. And then I had to go again for another appointment, and they called to cancel that appointment. And I'm like, okay, well, now how long is it going to take me to get in to see the doctor? Well, he doesn't have any time on his schedule for 8 weeks. And I'm like, so it's a 12-week process. I had a 4-week break, and I'm going to have an 8-week break. And then I'll be halfway through with this. And I got more than one thing I need to work on, you know, and that was the end. That was the end of my VA experience. I kind of decided at that time I was going to look for alternatives outside of the VA, and just kind of went on a journey to try to find a better way. And that was, and my ex realized I wasn't doing therapy anymore. And I'm like, and I explained to her what happened. And she's like, well, we got to do something else. So I started looking for alternative treatments, you know, maybe things that aren't necessarily common practices. In 2021, or at that time it's 2018 or 17, there's got to be a better way to do this than what they're doing. And that journey is probably the most rewarding journey I've ever been on. I learned a lot. I learned more about mental health than this grunt infantryman probably should know. But it led us to some real world solutions for PTSD. And now I tell everybody PTSD is 100% healable, 100%. You know, and how do you do that? You know, I'm telling you, the research that's out there right now, you can fix PTSD. Hands down, full stop, 100% of the time. And
well, I want to learn a little bit more about what some of those solutions are that you discovered. But first, just for everyone that's coming in, thank you for joining us tonight. We're talking with Dan Jarvis here on PTSD911 Presents. And if you have a question for Dan at some point, just put it in the chat, and we'll get to those as soon as we can. So, Dan, what are some of the things that you learned in your process and the things that worked for you, and how did that transition into you now serving others?
So when I started going down the rabbit hole of looking for solutions, I literally, my ex-wife had brought a gentleman in to do some training at the sheriff's office. She was a civilian administrator, and he's a retired Army colonel or lieutenant colonel, Green Beret. And we got to talking, and he invited me to come to a men's leadership retreat in Tampa, Florida. And I met some really awesome people. And that was April of 2018. And they had a psychologist there. And then there was another Air Force veteran who was doing some fundraising for an organization that was doing some really new groundbreaking research on PTSD. And that was the weekend I decided, 22-0 is what I wanted to do. And for me, 22-0 has a dual meaning. 22 veterans is average what we're losing. The goal is to take it to 0. But as a law enforcement officer, the signals and codes, signal 22-0 is an armed disturbance, which is how most of us first responders and veterans usually will die by a firearm. And about 6 months later, I had started the nonprofit. I did all the administrative, set up all the paperwork. Was trying to find other solutions, ways to connect veterans to and first responders to counselors that are into some of these alternative fringes. And then I was invited to attend the first public training in Albuquerque, New Mexico for one of those alternative treatments. And I'm listening to these guys the first day, and they're saying the same things. That, well, you can heal PTS, and their statistics were, I think it was like 92 to 96% successful. And I'm sitting in the back, and meanwhile, I don't really know much about this, but I heard that whole first day. And day 2, we're on a break, and I went up to one of the trainers. I'm like, you guys are making some pretty bold claims, because the reality is, I've been 27 months in combat as an infantryman. I did 7 years in law enforcement, but the worst stuff was when I was 11, and I've been dealing with a lot of trauma for a very long period of my life. And that's what a lot of people don't understand is, a lot of us go through trauma in childhood, drives us into those professions of service to others to help. And
it's amazing how many first responders I've talked to over the past couple of years. And if you talk to them and kind of dig into their background, many of them have something that triggered them back then that kind of guided their journey into helping others now.
Correct.
Which then, that trauma adds to this trauma, and it just kind of accumulates.
I would say between 60 and 70% of the first responders we work with have adverse childhood experiences. They have trauma in childhood. Anyways, I tell the trainer, I'm like, look, if I'm going to recommend this to a vet or a first responder, I want to experience this. So he was like, well, you want to do it in 15 minutes after we come out of break? I'm like, yeah, let's get it over with. Let's do it. Because I'm about to show these mental health counselors. There was like 25 counselors in the room that this guy's full of himself. That was my brain. I was just very untrusting. And, but he convinced me to sit in the front of the class, and he ran me through that process. And I was like, wow, it was profound. I went from that process. You talk about the event. It's kind of like cognitive behavioral therapy sandwiched between a visual kinesthetic disassociation followed up with cognitive behavioral therapy. So you talk about the trauma, they see a trigger, and they do what's called a break state. They pull you out of the emotions. They reground you, and then they set up a visual kinesthetic disassociation process. And my stress level on that event, it was a 9 or a 10. So it was like 0 is no negative emotions, 9, 10, it's like at the peak. And within about 45 minutes after the rewind part of it, they had me talk about it again. And I was talking about it, and I was telling the story, and I was waiting for the shoe to drop. I'm like, where's the emotions? Because 45 minutes ago, I got extremely emotional in front of a classroom of mental health counselors, and now I'm not having any emotion attached to this. And it was the really most bizarre thing. And it was one 45-minute session, was able to disconnect neurologically the trauma that's connected from that event to the emotions. So the event didn't change. None of the details changed, but the emotions were no longer attached to it. And then all of a sudden, then you're sleeping. Then the sleep restores. And I'm like, why is this not everywhere?
How after you've had all this stuff that's kept you from sleeping and all the stuff that's related to that, and now you're free from that, how does that feel?
Well, it was profound when the sleep patterns reset. In other words, I would go from sleeping a couple hours a night, night sweats, night terrors, to 8, 9 hours. And it was just like, I felt rejuvenated, regenerated. Literally, it was like resetting the nervous system is how it felt. And then over time, as the more sleep you go through, the better you get. And when I ended up going back to Florida after that training event, there was a counselor at that training from Orlando. So I called her up and says, I want 2 weeks on your schedule because I got a lot of stuff. And now I'm excited because I see the light at the end of the tunnel is turned back on. I'm like, I see hope. And it was kind of funny because I think we did like 3 sessions. And mind you, I scheduled 10 days with her, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, because you have to have sleep cycles between all of the sessions. And after like the 3rd session with her, I'm like, Cindy, I'm sorry, I don't have anything left, So I had to cancel the rest of my appointments. And then I'm like, we have the nonprofit, we did a lot of fundraising, and we started focusing, on that specific treatment. So we started paying for counselors to get trained, and, and predominantly, mostly we were sponsoring in Florida, and even down at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas down in Coral Springs, Florida, we did a training ahead of the year anniversary of the shooting from Valentine's Day. So we funded a bunch of counselors down there getting trained, and then COVID hits. And COVID was probably one of the best things that happened to us as an organization, because it allowed us to lift and shift fire, basically. Money dried up. We weren't getting the funds to sponsor counselors, but then we're like, well, how do we do this in a way that we can continue moving forward? So we did and I had done a lot of other trainings, and the body of work that we're talking about isn't new science. This is stuff that's been around for a hot minute. So something called Neuro-Linguistic Programming. So Neuro-Linguistic Programming was put together in the early 1980s with Dr. John Grinder and Dr. Richard Bandler. So they basically, they say we stand on the shoulders of giants. They went back to Virginia Satir, Milton, Fritz Perls, Milton Erickson, some of the pioneers of mental health and psychology and counseling. And they took the best of what those individuals were doing in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and they grouped it all into that body of work called NLP. And the treatment that we started using was designed as a phobia cure for like frogs and heights and things like that. And we just adapted it to suit our needs. And being that we're a peer support organization, we're like, getting into the details is extremely difficult. Having to listen to people share their trauma it's hard on the person, and it's hard on us. So we're like, you know what? The research shows when the trigger happens, there's a 4 to 6 hour window that you can reset the state of emotions attached to that memory. So in other words, we have you think about an event, it triggers you. We assess the 0 to 10, where they're feeling, how it feels presently, all those emotions. And we're seeing 8s, 9s, and 10s drop to 0s and 1s in an hour and 45 minutes. People that are extremely visual, I think the fastest I've done was about 10 minutes, where you literally neurologically disconnect the emotion attached to the traumatic event. And so we had a group of licensed counselors that were working with us, and we had a clinical psychologist who was retired from the VA. She retired from the VA because they would not allow her to use the alternative treatments. I met her down at Coral Springs. She's from Miami area, and we sponsored her to get trained in the Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories protocol, and they would not allow her to use it.
Wow.
They forbid her from using an alternative treatment.
Wow.
And that's another reason. It's like the VA, they're so stuck in their ways, and they're so scared of being irrelevant. We want to be irrelevant. 220 does not want to exist. I want to go out of business. That's my number one goal, is to go out.
So let me ask you this: so you're retired, you're not going back into the field and experiencing more trauma. For those who are firefighters or whatever first responder agency they work with, they go through this training, and now they're going back to the field, and they're involved in another shooting. They go to another suicide. They all these things that have happened in the past. How does that?
That's a great question, Conrad. So when you're dealing with first responders, it's typically an accumulation of trauma. You might have 150 traumatic events in your career that you're personally exposed to. Let that sink in. We're having our first responders, police, fire, EMS, going into traumatic events regularly as a matter of profession. And so 2 of the agencies that we've trained in Florida, one is the Lake County Sheriff's Office, and the other is the Sumter County Sheriff's Office. And I always liken trauma, I use a cup, right? So say you have a cup and it's just full of emotions and trauma. When you empty the cup, it may fill up over time. But the reality is, when you give the brain the ability to reset and get into REM sleep again, the brain is designed to heal itself. So those emotions are supposed to end up being processed out and moved to different components of the brain. That's called memory reconsolidation. That's what we were designed to do. We hit REM sleep. REM sleep moves the emotions out of your amygdala and then into the hippocampus. So your emotions will go into the hippocampal region, and the memories will go into the cerebellum, the long-term memory. And what they're doing with the peer support team is, once we train them, we have to go through all of their trauma history, and they work on real world events. And which is the beauty of it, because in order to get trained to be, a peer support, you have to go through the protocols.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's just a matter of, if you're exposed to another traumatic event, and if a couple of days later you're still feeling the symptoms, the stress levels, you can disconnect those neurological connections between those emotions and those events. You can do it within hours. You don't even have to wait days.
So you have the training to be able to manage that
Right.
when those new traumas come.
Yep. So
Okay.
Lake County Sheriff's Office had a young deputy who was involved with a shooting. It's not a normal thing to kill somebody or to
Sure.
shoot somebody. So he was pretty worked up. And the next day they brought him in and ran him through the process and allowed him those 3 days he's off to just relax with his family without those trauma responses. And it allows for a healthier, more well officer or firefighter.
Mm-hmm.
So
we have a question. It says, can you talk about the difference between this treatment and EMDR?
Yes, it works.
It works.
It works. I'm not saying anything about EMDR. EMDR is good for a lot of people, and the research.
I've heard a lot of good things about it. A lot of people I've talked to.
Right. For 40, maybe 35-40% of the people that go through EMDR, they have really good results. But if you're the other 60 to 65%, you're still struggling. I went through EMDR. EMDR, for me, I was literally all over the place. EMDR, you're using, and EMDR is also rooted in Neuro-Linguistic Programming.
Right.
That's also based in that NLP world. And what you're doing is you're provoking the emotions, and then you're using eye movements. And sometimes they'll put the vibrating balls that'll like go between. So it gets your brain, going into both sides of both hemispheres of the brain. And it's eye movement. I forget desensitization, reprocessing.
Yeah.
So, and that's also, there's another, treatment now called accelerated resolution therapy, ART, which is also, it's almost identical to the EMDR. They're all rooted in the NLP world. So the difference is the trauma resiliency protocol. You provoke the emotion, you have the triggers, and all you're having them do is thinking about it, and then you're creating bookends to the specific event. And what that is it's a still picture in your mind. You're making a visual snapshot, like a little freeze frame, and then you're draining the color out of those events. So you have an image that's black and white before the trauma occurred. So for me, we're having a ramp brief. We're getting ready to go outside the wire when we lose Doug, and then we're back inside the wire, cleaning weapons. I'm safe before, I'm safe after. The traumatic event occurs between that 3-hour window, and then you're watching yourself watching a disassociated movie. So a best example is you have them imagine, the room they watch their TV in. Like maybe they're in their living room, and they take that first still picture, that first freeze frame, and they put it up on that television, 65-inch TV, whatever it is. And then you move them to an observer position in the room, and they're looking back, and I'm looking back. So I'm watching Dan on the couch. Dan on the couch is watching the traumatic event from bookend to bookend in about 30 seconds, 30 to 45 seconds. And I have to see how Dan is reacting to the movie, because that's Dan on the couch is the subconscious. He's watching the event from beginning to end, and you got to keep them out of the event. So you don't want them reassociating into it. So you want to make sure they understand the visualizations before you put them in that position. And when you get them comfortable and relaxed, you'll associate them into the very end of that movie, and you'll do a rapid rewind from doing weapons maintenance on the fob rapidly to the beginning, the ramp brief, and you're going from black and white to color. And what's happening is you're working at the root at that point. You're doing subconscious, which EMDR is also doing subconscious. You're putting a beginning to the event. You're putting an end to the event. So that's the subconscious brain. It's like, oh, there's a beginning and there's an end. And the black and white imagery is, it's an old movie. And then when you do the rewind and it reverses the order of the events, that's when the amygdala is like, wait a minute, we're ending at the ramp brief, nothing bad happened. And the brain at that point cannot attach that emotion, and it splits the emotion out of it. So say you get them to like a 2 or a 3 on the stress level, and then all you got to do is take them to the birth of a child, a wedding day. You have them associated into a positive memory where they can feel the emotions of the positive memory. And that's layering over the traumatic memory. So now they're no longer feeling the trauma emotion when they recall that memory. They're feeling the positive emotion. remembering the bad stuff, but feeling the good stuff. And that kicks off that process of memory reconsolidation, where now all of a sudden you're sleeping again, and your cortisol levels go back to normal, your adrenal fatigues diminishes, and you're happy because you're not up 24 hours a day.
So when you're working with, or when a counselor, a therapist is working with someone, big tough SWAT officer, what I mean, some of this to an outsider may sound real kind of woo woo.
Mm-hmm.
What's a SWAT officer or some big tough guy that he comes in, and what's their response to something like this?
So I'll give you a prime example. I won't say which agency, but one of the departments that we trained in Florida, we trained 13 of their deputies. 10 of them would have qualified for a clinical diagnosis of PTSD.
Wow.
And they were working every single day. That's the amount of stress they're under.
Mm-hmm.
The beauty is when you actually go through the training part and they feel it, it's a release. We had a Marine in Sumter County who was a deputy for 9 years and was in Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah. So did a lot of combat as a Marine in Iraq. He had tons of trauma. And when you see the way that his demeanor changed and his body changed, his physiology changed, and now he no longer has PTSD. He had it. He knew he had it. He was diagnosed by the VA as having it. And now he doesn't have those emotions anymore. The key is the rapport. All right. The only thing I got to do for that SWAT officer is have him trust me enough to do the process. That's it. Because you don't have to believe the process is going to work. You just got to do the visualizations. Your brain does it automatically. You can't stop it. And that's the remarkable part about it. So training SWAT officers to do this is critical, because a SWAT officer will sit down with another SWAT officer and they trust them. I just share my story with anybody I work with. I'll tell my story and where I was, and they're automatically connected. And then next thing you know, they're running the process, and then they're like, what just happened? I love it, because I'll see them yawning on the after they do a session, and that's when the amygdala just shuts off and they go parasympathetic, and I'll sit there and be like, got them, because I know that their whole world's about to change.
Yeah. We have a comment from Renee. She said that counselors need training themselves so they're not traumatized from the stories that they hear.
That's the biggest thing with it's called vicarious trauma, because I've heard some stories that I wish I could unhear. It's like, that's why I was so grateful when we developed ours. We left out all of the content. So we won't let them talk about their trauma before or after. All we're doing is they're firing that trigger. They're getting triggered. We're setting up the bookends. We're running the disassociated movie. We're doing the rewind. We're resetting the emotion. And then we're checking the SEDS afterwards. And when you see them go from a 10 to a 0, you see it more than just them telling you. You literally see the physiological, the changes. Sometimes their color comes back on their face, but we don't have to listen to the trauma, because I've done some sessions with people that were civilians that had worse trauma than I could have ever even imagined on the battlefield. And that's the remarkable. Yes, definitely therapists, and a lot of therapists do the same thing. They get into those professions because they want to help people because of their own trauma. So yeah, I don't mean to pick on therapists. My experience, it's just not been a pleasant one.
Yeah. So I have another question from Renee, and I don't know what these 3-letter acronyms stand for. Maybe you do. Have you ever used TFT or EFT alone, or with the NLP?
So we do, most of the things that we do is heavy into the NLP, because we do another process called emotions management. And, that's more of a framing exercise. So TFT and EFT, no, we don't do that. But the framing is extremely powerful, because I started like, well, if you can provoke a trigger and reset an emotion on a trauma response, can you do the same thing with somebody with anger problems? So what we'll do is we'll take them to an event where they can still feel that anger, and we'll provoke that triggered response and then do a disconnect. So we'll disassociate them from that memory. I'm a military guy, so I use military languages. Have you ever seen video from a drone as you're looking down into that event where that anger was established? Goes straight up so fast, it gets so far away from you, you can't feel it anymore. And they'll do that. And it's almost like you're guiding the brain to do that. And when they get that disconnect, all you have them do is objectively look at what happened, because the majority of the folks, probably 70%, establish those negative emotions like anger issues when they're like 5, 6, 7 years old. And you allow them to reframe those early memories with today's understanding and learning of events, and they'll literally release the emotions. And that's the really cool part, is because when you get them to a 5-year-old event, and maybe that's the first time that they had an anger reaction, because that's the trigger. They're defaulting to childhood, or or a call 1 year on the force, and they're 19 years in, and all of a sudden they're triggering. And when you can get those reframes, you'll see them release it, and that de-escalates the person, because they're no longer going to default to that 5-year-old trigger. So it's a very powerful way of reframing and releasing negative emotions, even with like anxiety. You can cure anxiety too. People have like panic attacks or anxiety issues. All you do is find the root, and then you do the reframes on the root after you provoke the emotion and disconnect it. And, I had a former firefighter who 6, 7 panic attacks every single day. And we did the EMP process. That was about a 10 to 15 minutes. And for him, he was a very faith-based individual. So I'm like, Ryan, what's the Bible say about fear? And boom, he started spitting chapter and verse, and his eyes got really big because he felt the shift internally. And he goes, you just did that voodoo stuff right there. I said, no, you framed it in a way that made sense, because the brain has got what's called the make sense mandate. That's why so many people are taken out of context. They'll say something that doesn't make sense, and then their filters will interpret it and make sense of it. And a lot of times you're left with the wrong interpretation of what actually happened. So that EMP process, that's what we use EMP and the trauma resiliency. That's kind of what we do. Hope that answered your question.
What does this do for you? I mean, just having this kind of being able to help others, what does it do for you?
So Viktor Frankl, right? He developed something, logos therapy, just the ability to help other people. This is better than any antidepressant on the planet. Because when you have somebody who's got PTS really, really bad, and you can walk them through a process and watch them let it go and change their whole future. I mean, because we've worked with veterans who were absolutely suicidal, and then we helped them on their healing journey, and they got married and had a family. Changing family trees, extremely gratifying. So for me, I'm trying to change culture in the law enforcement world. That's what I really want to make a big impact. We've already treated we're over 3,800 people that we've worked with, and just to be able to give people their lives back and putting them back on that path of that purpose that they're really needing to pursue, or the person that they're supposed to be, is extremely rewarding. I mean, I had a gentleman who called me. We had a suicide in our battalion May of this year. So I put out a Facebook video to a closed Facebook group for, the guys from the Elite 124 infantry. And this guy calls me up, and he's like, I'm sitting here with a bottle of Tito's in one hand and a 45 in the other. And I'm trying to figure out which one to go to. And I'm like, brother, put the 45 away, finish the Tito's. If you're going to do one of those two, go with the Tito's. And then he, we built some more rapport, because I knew his entire story. And he asked me if I would run it. I said, I will, but I need you sober. And he was like, dude, I haven't been sober in 10 years. And that's his world that he's been in. I said, I need you to promise me you'll call me when you get off work, before you go to work, you're on lunch hour, well, you don't have alcohol in your system, because I need you to be able to do some things and let your brain do some things. And he scored out 76 out of 80 points. And I said, we've got 2 hours. You and we're going to work for 2 hours. And we neurologically disconnected 3 traumas in his life, 1 from childhood, 2 from combat. And then we went through all the negative emotions: anger, sadness, fear, shame, hurt, survivor guilt. And we had him release all of those, and his whole world's changed. And he doesn't, no longer has the same, lifestyle. He's actually able to be present with his kids. He had already lost his marriage, which is common. But he's now present with his kids, and present with the rest of his family. And that's extremely rewarding, because that guy scoring that high, I mean, 7 days a week sucked for him. So he would have been a statistic eventually.
And that's probably reasons why we see stories end up on the evening news.
Yes.
Bad decisions. Yeah. And it's not necessarily because they're just a bad person. It's because they haven't dealt with all the traumas that they've experienced over the years.
There's a judge down in Miami who I had a really long conversation with, and he's trying to change mental health in the criminal justice system, because statistically, that's where most of them get their first mental health is actually in jail. And he told me that 97% of women that are incarcerated were sexually assaulted before they ever entered the criminal justice system.
97%.
97% and 78% of the men.
Wow.
It's trauma. They make really poor decisions. Self-medication, drugs, alcohol. Next thing you know, emotions got them doing things that they're out of control. They literally lost control.
Wow. That's a really sad statistic. And, you know, first responders are not immune to all those traumas, right? I mean,
No.
all of us are human.
No. I knew a lot of deputies who would do 160 hours a month working, and then they do another 40 hours a month doing off-duty work. You know, where's your rest? You're never letting your brain process. Firefighters, first responders, you're working 24 48, so you're sleep deprived that 24 hours that you're working, and then you can't even catch up because sleep loss is accumulative. You can't make it up.
Yeah.
You know? And then like, well, I got to sleep, so bottle of Jim Beam or you know Jack and Coke, you know, and then they're not processing.
And these days with, you know, fewer people in these professions and people leaving like, you know, like crazy, there's mandatory overtime. So not only, I heard of one agency in, I forget where it was, in the Carolina, someplace where a fire company went from 24/48 to 48/24.
Holy, could you imagine that?
Right.
And then we wonder why they're having problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, that's crazy. That was one of the big draws for one of the agencies that we worked with, is they were resigning left and right. They were having a hard time keeping, and that's law enforcement across the nation.
Right. Yeah.
They're having a hard time, you know, retaining, you know, you lose a deputy sheriff with 10 years of experience. Guess what? You have to wait 10 years to train somebody else to get that institutional knowledge back.
Yeah.
So when you're able to reset those emotions, and then you're seeing the officers like happy to be a cop again, they remember why they got into it in the first place, because now they're no longer burdened by those emotions. You know, just one resignation, what is, you know, probably $100,000 to train a new police officer or more.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I want to get into how we can get in touch with you in just a minute, but for everyone who's here, just to let you know that this program is brought to you by PTSD 911 documentary, and we are passionate about making a difference for first responders, and that's what we're going to do with this film. That's what we're doing with this program, and we're going to continue to bring you free programs like this on a monthly basis, twice a month, and we got a really exciting one coming up later this month, and I'm going to pull their little graphic up here so you can see who this is going to be. We're going to have that peer support couple on January 26th. These guys are amazing. I met them a year ago at the National FOP Wellness Summit, and I think they're going to be there again this year. And so Kathy and Javier Bustos are going to be here live right here on this channel. So be sure to mark that on your calendar. And we got some other amazing people coming up in the next few months as we gear up toward our premiere of our film later this year. October 28th, National First Responder Day, is the day when this film will be finished. Pray to God that it happens, and if we can get our funding in place. And so if you want to help us reach that goal, go to our website, make a donation of any amount. We've had some amazing people make donations anywhere from $10,000 to, you know, $20. And so if you want to make a donation there, go to, let me pull this little thing up here so you can see where to go to. Let's see here. Go to PTSD911movie.com, click on the donate button, make a small contribution or a big contribution. We'll take all kinds. But Dan, where can we find you? Where can we find your information?
So our website is 220.org. It's just like it looks, 22zero.org. You can, if you're needing assistance, you can send an email. You can click the get help. You'll get our case manager. A lot of times people are surprised that typically within 12 hours they're on the phone with somebody and they're getting assigned a coach, and then all of a sudden they're working with somebody. If you're an active law enforcement officer, an active first responder, military, whatever, and you don't want anybody to know that you're seeking help, we don't use EAP. We don't use insurance. The treatments are free. It's covered by the nonprofit. You don't have to worry about.
That's amazing. That's
you don't
amazing.
have to worry
That
about
they're free.
anybody finding out that you even came to us. So go back to work like nothing ever. And that's one of the things that I really wish I would have had as a squad leader in the Army. I could have gone somewhere to get help, and nobody in my chain of command would have known. So that's one of the reasons why we set this up. We want to remove all barriers from, the need. And the way we're doing this teleconference right now is all we need. We don't have to be in the same room. So it doesn't matter where in the country you are. We have ample number of people, coaches that can assist you.
I just noticed here you can search by state.
Yep. That's not up to date. I got to actually update that because we've done quite a few since then. But typically the emails come into me, and then we have our case manager do the assessment, and we place them with somebody. If you really want to experience or see what it is we do, on the front page there, you see Healing the Heroes of 9/11 is a documentary that we put out. It came out 9/11 of this year. And we took 5 first responders, 4 from Ground Zero in New York City and 1 from the Pentagon, who have all been struggling for 20 years with PTSD. And different aspects. We've got EMS, we got firefighter, we got a Marine that's in there. We even got a chaplain who's in there. When you see, trauma, how it affects so many different people, but all of those individuals are healthy now. And then there's some of the law enforcement officers at the very end. You'll see that we've worked with, and please just reach out. Get help at 220.org. The email will come directly to me. We'll have you assigned a coach. You can get the Get Help Now button on the website, or you can even call me on my mobile number. I'll give it out over the air. It's 863-221-6304.
Hey, Dan, Don wants to know, how do we bring this type of training therapy assistance to Pittsburgh?
Get me in touch with the right individual. Have a conversation with somebody. Typically what I like to do is have them send somebody to us that's been struggling, and we show them, not with our people, but with theirs. And then it's just a matter of, the training actually can be done remotely. It doesn't have to be in person. I would prefer with law enforcement to be in the room with them, because we got Dr. Phil Bequee. He does what he calls his methods Resiliency. So he works with all the stuff left of Bang, and then we come in and do our training, and then that's the right of Bang. So we work with the bounce back after the trauma. He works with trying to build resiliency so you don't get to the trauma. And you would get both of us to come up there. It would be a 3-day training. So you just have to be in touch with your training folks, because in Florida, what they're using it under is de-escalation training. And just because you're de-escalating by eliminating the triggers that's causing officers to escalate really, really quickly.
So someone asked about the phone number again. I think that's the right one. Is that the correct number?
That's the correct one. That's my mobile number.
There you go. Well, thank you for offering that. And if you are out there needing help, don't sit there alone. Reach out for some help and get the help that you need to be well.
Absolutely.
Not only for if you're a first responder, but for your life after your first responder job. I think that's an important place. It's important to be healthy while you're on the job, but it's even just as important to be healthy after work, right?
No, absolutely. And here's another caveat. We'll work with the entire family. So if your spouse, trust me, if you're a police officer and you're struggling, your spouse is struggling, your kids are struggling. So we'll work with the entire family unit. And again, there's no cost associated with that.
And that to me is really amazing that you have supporters who support you to be able to provide this at no cost. That's fantastic. So, well, Dan, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your work. Thank you for your willingness to come on the program tonight and talk about what you guys do. I think just from the comments that we're getting, people really got a lot out of this, and hopefully that you can be able to help more and more people in the work that you do and make a difference for first responders and veterans alike. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Conrad. Appreciate it.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. This has been a conversation about wellness and some solutions for people struggling with the traumas that they have dealt with. And so thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for being a part of our community. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please subscribe so you get all those messages and when these programs come. And also, if you want to follow us on our social sites, please do that. PTSD 911 movie we're on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. Yes, TikTok as well. So join us there. And we'll be back on January 26th with that peer support couple. Thank you for watching tonight. Be well wherever you are. And if you are needing help, don't sit there alone. Go reach out, ask for help. And you will find that there are people who want to help you. So thank you for watching, everybody. This has been PTSD 911 Presents. My name is Conrad Weaver. And until next time, be well.